Let me ask you, who are the must-see characters now? Because we talked about what makes a great character. Who are the must-see characters? I want to maybe go with a couple mainstream characters and then some lesser-known characters on the independent circuit that we may not have heard of. And you said, wow, you know what? When you come to an independent show, you're going to get a great show. So let's start with Tom. Who's some must-see characters in mainstream wrestling, but then also a couple that you would say as independent wrestlers?
Mainstream right now, and it's still kind of hard to say because right now mainstream obviously means WWE. They don't have that one big star that they've always had in generations past. But some that are, I would say, are close to that level is one would have to be Charlotte Flair, Ric Flair's daughter. She's pretty much the top of WWE right now. Another one that I really like in WWE is Drew McIntyre. He's the WWE champion currently, and just a very, very talented guy. And if I got to pick one more, probably Bray Wyatt. He is like his current character, like he's had a couple different characters since he's been in WWE. The one he's got right now is the hottest one that he has had because it's like a split personality thing. He's got like this kind of demented Mr. Rogers type character, but then he flips the switch and he turns into this other character called the Fiend with like a Slipknot mask and just violent and brutal, and it's just very cool. So those would be the ones that I think you would really want to look at in mainstream. As far as independents, I gotta say Tessa Blanchard. She is one of my favorite wrestlers in the world right now. She, like Steve said, just an amazing person to meet behind the scenes. I have had the pleasure to meet her and talk to her for a second or two. In the ring, there's not too many people that can touch her as far as in-ring skills go. And she's another second-generation star. Her dad was Tully Blanchard from the Four Horsemen. Yep. And her stepdad was Magnum TA. So she's got she's got the background. And then another one is a guy that's in AEW right now named Brian Cage, also a former Warrior Wrestling champion. But he's one, like, I've watched him for a very long time. The first national exposure he got was on a show called Lucha Underground. And, he moved from there to Impact Wrestling to now he's in AEW. And just to watch him evolve and watch his just overall skill set evolve, and physically the guy's a monster. So he's one that I think I already consider him a huge star just because I'm a wrestling fan and I, follow all this stuff, but he's one that I think definitely could be, at some point a mainstream name. So independently, those would probably be my top two.
Do you think that the wrestlers that you name are someone that could carry the belt, that could at some point evolve into being the person that, well, right now we know the Charlotte Flair is probably the biggest draw. But some of the other names that you mentioned, do you think those wrestlers could carry the belt, could carry the moniker, could be the brand ambassador, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, if I had to pick one to say, this could be the next Hulk Hogan, just as a reference point, I would probably say right now Drew McIntyre in WWE, because he checks all the boxes, the ring skills, the personality, the charisma, the drawing power, the fans love him, all that kind of stuff. So he, right now at this point in wrestling, I think he would be your best bet as far as that goes.
Okay, great. Steve, how about you?
I'll pick so I agree with all of Tom's, but I'm not going to duplicate him. I also agree with MJF was mentioned earlier. I think he's on that list. I'm going to pick a few characters.
I mentioned him and I forgot about him.
Yeah. I'm going to pick a few characters that stand out because they're just completely different and amazing. So I'll start with, in AEW, Pentagon and Phoenix. And they've been on our shows a couple of times. They're luchadors, got their start in Lucha Underground, the TV series from a few years back. And there's something about them, and I work with tons of luchadors, right? And many are amazing. Pentagon's character is just perfect. He's basically like the Day of the Dead personified, like Mexican sugar skull paint on his face with a really scary mask over his face. He is just, the character is perfect. It's the perfect character. And his real life brother, Phoenix, his tag team partner, is probably the most impressive athletic wrestler in the world today. So in this two set of brothers who are a tag team, you have one of the best characters and one of the best athletes. And when you've seen them once, you know who they are. They're burned in your mind. You know, you might see a lot of other wrestlers. This guy's got trunks. This guy's got pants. There's some other luchadors. The show's over. I don't really remember. When you've seen Pentagon and Phoenix, you remember them. They are very memorable. So I'll say them for AEW. And then for WWE, there's a guy who is not being pushed right now. He's actually being kind of de-pushed, but he could be one of the guys to carry the water and be the face of the brand. A guy named Ricochet, who is a younger guy, incredible athlete. I mean, the guy can absolutely fly. He has a lot of natural charisma. He's the kind of guy where if given the ball, he could run with it. So mainstream, I will say Ricochet in WWE, Pentagon and Phoenix in AEW. Independent scene, there's a lot of guys that we've had. Brian Pillman Jr. is special. He's our current champ, and he's our champ for a reason. The kid has every non-measurable, every X factor. He's got it. Charisma, likability. You see him get the crap kicked out of him in the ring, and you feel bad for him. You just like the guy, and that you cannot teach. You can be an incredible technical wrestler, but you can't teach connection with the audience. Yeah. So I'd say Brian Pillman on the independents. And there's also two up-and-coming guys who are really weird characters, but they own it and it works. One is called Warhorse. He's basically a metalhead dude with face paint, and he wears all denim, and he's headbanging, and he cuts these crazy promos. The other one is named Danhausen, and he's basically like a metrosexual vampire. And he has these weird, goofy promos, and he walks to the ring with a jar of human teeth, and he dances to the Pee Wee Herman tequila dance. And it's super weird, and it makes no sense until you see it and you go, this works. I don't know why it works, but it works.
Yeah.
So those are the guys I would say.
I think you hit on something in the fact that it works for them. And, you know, being a fan, but then also being a promoter, one of the things that you guys have touched on is having that it factor. You can't really measure it, you can't really describe it, but you know it when you see it. And I think that's where the connection comes in. And I think that's what makes for a good character and character development and longevity as well. You know, you talked about it. So it's great to hear about that. And also to familiarize myself with some of the more up-and-coming independent wrestlers, because I would like to go to some of the shows. I had a couple buddies that did some independent wrestling, Tony and Ivan, you know, and they would have character and they discuss different ideas and things like that. So to hear how these characters grow and evolve, it's tremendous. So good job. Demetrius, how about you?
Here's a guy, and I'll start with WWE because that's kind of the gateway drug for all of us for wrestling is WWE. So, there's a guy in WWE who I would pay to watch get beat up, and that's Baron Corbin. He's as hateable a human being as you would ever, hateable as a character as you'd ever want to see, and he just owns it. And the more heat he gets, the more booze and the more vitriol that gets sent his way, he just turns it up even more. And I really like about it. I really do get upset when I see him on my screen. I'm like, oh. And so I would pay money to see him get beat up. Okay. So that's one. There's another guy. I won't know what I'd classify him as an indie guy, but he's never, to the best of my knowledge, been employed by a wrestling promotion here in the States full time. His name is Will Ospreay. He is a young man from the United Kingdom. He works primarily in Japan, and their style of wrestling, you could do a whole nother podcast just on Japanese wrestling and the difference between that and what we get mostly here in the States. But he is incredible. Steve was talking about Ricochet. He's over in WWE. Will Ospreay is kind of like, almost like his mirror image. They have very similar athleticism, incredibly. They just both exude charisma. And they do stuff in the ring that you've never seen before. If anybody listening to this, YouTube Will Ospreay versus Ricochet. They've had several matches over the years. Wow. And they'll do stuff that you will not soon forget. And this guy's definitely independent. I saw him on an MLW show. I believe his name is Jonathan Fatu. Tom, Steve, that name ring any bells?
Yeah.
Yeah. He is a Samoan descent. I don't know what his correlation is. I hate to generalize, but I just feel like if you're Samoan descent, you're going to be linked to The Rock and the Wild Samoans and everything else, right or wrong.
They pretty much are, except for Samoa Joe.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Jonathan too is like he's an enormous human being who can move like somebody a third of his size. It's kind of weird to see. I saw him in LA Park is what he goes by now, tear it up at MLW's first pay-per-view taping. So Jonathan Fatu is a name to keep an eye out for. YouTube some Will Ospreay stuff. You won't regret it. And Baron Corbin, like, honestly, if I saw him, if he like walked outside my door out right now, I'd probably run outside and try to hit him. He's just so annoying. But he owns